Welcome to a Thursday edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm John Gonzalez, rejoined by our NBA insider, Bill Ryder, and returning to the program from earlier this week, our lead NBA draft analyst, Kyle Boone. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Neither of you, I don't think, are French, which might be good because all of the Frenchmen were drafted last night.
Yeah, maybe I should
I
have
don't even
been
speak
French.
French.
Maybe I could have been a part of the Knicks franchise by then. I don't know.
Really
We.
amazing. It's the
That's all I
first.
got.
Yeah, I know one phrase that Bill. I was in France for. I mentioned this to Aaron last night when we did like an emergency post first round uh, draft pod. But I was in France for when they won the 2018 World Cup. So my one phrase in French is "Je suis désolé, ne parle pas français," which means my bad, I don't speak French, and then that's it.
That's good.
Then I just
Good
would
to
like
know.
ask. I just would ask people for help. So we're going to talk about the Frenchman. We're going to talk about. It's the first time, by the way, that three people from one country were taken in the top 10, and it wasn't America. Like the first time a non-U.S. country had pulled that off. So milestone for the French. And we're going to talk about them later in the show. We're also going to discuss the best value from the first round, the biggest reach. We'll preview the second round as well, and also got to get into it. Discuss where Bronny James might go. And we got an idea on maybe a funny outcome there. But first, Kyle, we're going to start with the first two picks. Went the way that you expected. Zachary Risacher goes to the Hawks, and then Alex Sarr to the Wizards. What do you make of these two, and how do they fit?
Yeah, this was what we expected, right, John? Risacher going number one to the Atlanta Hawks. That was the expected outcome. The Hawks decision makers had made their way to France. Here in the last 6 weeks to watch Risacher in person to get kind of a comfort level for this prospect. And I think all signs pointed to him being the number one pick. He's 6'8", could put the ball on the floor. He can shoot it at a pretty high level and has really grown in that area specifically. I think to give people some confidence projecting his game to the NBA level. You watch his defense, I think you feel pretty comfortable that he can defend multiple positions. So in a draft that is totally wide open, and there's not a lot of confidence in any of these top prospects, I think there's a comfort level for the Hawks picking Risacher, just knowing, hey, this guy looks like an NBA player. He has the tools and the skill set of an NBA player. We'll take him and feel hopefully pretty good about it. Obviously, Alex Sarr declining to work out for the Atlanta Hawks at number one kind of maybe made that choice a little bit easier. Sarr ends up slipping to number two to the Washington Wizards, and the Wizards get, hopefully a foundational centerpiece at the center spot who can be a defensive anchor for that team for a long time. Really liked what the Wizards did on draft night, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, Sarr, just the defensive tools, the movement skills for his size, and his production that he's been able to produce this past couple years, I think is really impressive. So 1-2 as expected. Obviously, some surprises throughout the draft. But yeah, the two Frenchmen going 1-2, not terribly surprising.
Bill, we know what the Wizards are about. They're Tank City. They moved Denny Advia yesterday to Portland for a bushel of picks, two firsts, a couple seconds, which is fine. Makes sense for them. And I think it actually makes sense a little bit for Portland, too, because it gets them out of the tax for a bad team. What are the Hawks about? What are they going to do this offseason? This is a massive summer for them.
I mean, you said this is a massive couple weeks, and I was listening to you,
Yeah.
Kyle, and I love the optimism with this pick, and I hope it works out. But for Landry Fields, the pressure is intense because obviously Sarr's unwillingness to try out for him. And if you listen to, because I went and tracked it down, did a radio interview locally in Atlanta where he talked about this. It's not like he was happy about it. He wasn't particularly diplomatic about, understandably, his frustrations because you're right, John. They have to get this pick right. They got to figure out what they want to do with some of the guys in the roster, including at that position. And I think the big question is obviously Trae Young and/or DeJounte Murray. Are you in a sort of a mini rebuild, but you're not rebuilding? You feel like this is a guy that can help you now? Are you just tearing it down and going the route the Wizards are, which I think is probably the right approach? I mean, take 2 or 3 or 4 years. I'm not sure Fields has an owner, and the owner is the person. Really, the owner's son's the person that brought Landry Fields in when they moved on and fired Travis Schlenk. And so obviously Landry is the GM and he's in charge, and he's very good at his job, we think. But there's a very involved owner there, and usually involved owners don't want to wait 3 or 4 years. You're right, John. It's a really tricky situation. This pick has to be right, and obviously we're not going to know that for a while. And they have to decide now what this pick is and how it fits as they make really big decisions in the immediacy about what you do with. I think it's Trae Young who will be on the trade block. That's the expectations from GMs I've talked to. But there's a world where maybe it's DeJounte Murray or it's both those guys, depending on how deep they want to go on a rebuild.
Yeah, I think it's got to be at least Trae Young. We saw what happened when they unplugged him last season when he was injured, and all of a sudden the defense went from really bad, worse than the league, to like middle of the pack. And you're like, oh, wait a minute here. I wonder what the addition by subtraction might be. I'd also detonate Clint Capella. He's got a year left on his deal, expiring contract there. Could be an attractive piece. And then, yeah, maybe also DeJounte Murray. Clearly, this doesn't work. I would build around Jalen Johnson and then just go forward. But we'll see whether or not they hit on Risacher. We get to pick number 3. That's where, when you guys were on earlier in the week, we all expected, hey, this is going to be fun. This is when all the drama is going to happen. The Houston Rockets were part of a trade involving the Nets, where they ended up sending some picks back to the Brooklyn Nets, so the Brooklyn Nets can control their draft and go full tank city for Reed Sheppard, or not Reed Sheppard, for Cooper Flagg next year. And then the Rockets in exchange got some Suns picks back, Bill, where all of a sudden it's like, hey, maybe if KD comes available, they could make a move on him. Instead, they stick and stay and end up with Reed Sheppard. Kyle, I want to get your opinion on Reed Sheppard in just a second. But Bill, what did you make of the Rockets just deciding, nah, we're going to keep this pick, and we've got some nice young players, and we're going to play the waiting game here?
So talking to some folks, the Kevin Durant thing was obviously very, very real. And I guess someone should have, just before that became one of the prospective plans, before it didn't materialize, just reminded them that Matt Ishbia believes this is a championship contender. Most GMs and most people, and I'm sure all of us, look at that Phoenix team and see a team that's going to struggle to be, I think, a playoff team next year, or at least a top 6 team. Their owner doesn't see it that way, guys. He, talking to people that are close to him in his inner circle, legitimately, he believes they're a championship level team. And the folks that I'm talking to are having trouble now, I think, selling that vision to me without being incredulous, the way that I think we're all pretty incredulous. So I guess, look, I'll let Kyle speak to the pick. Houston thought that they had an opportunity to go get Kevin Durant, get a really big name, and really make a move. And the problem becomes, that makes sense if you're dealing with a rational organization. I think what everyone's learning, including Houston, is that Phoenix is not a rational organization. It has an owner that either doesn't know what he's doing, or, if we want to be generous, is still in that learning curve part of owning an NBA team, and hasn't gotten around to the fact that this is not fantasy sports and it doesn't work that way. They still think in Houston that in Phoenix, that they have a contender. They don't. And obviously that was, I don't know about a surprise, but there was a world where Houston thought maybe we can make a move because Phoenix will see things as they are. And John, Kyle, they're not dealing in reality just yet.
Bill, you saw what happened yesterday. Ishbia tweeted that KD loves Phoenix and Phoenix loves KD. So he's not going anywhere. Kyle, sell us on Reed Sheppard. How's he fit?
He fits great. He would fit well with just about any team in the NBA. I think that's ultimately going to be a good thing for the Houston Rockets that they stayed and picked. I thought there was a chance that maybe they move back, gather some assets. Some teams that are picking behind them clearly weren't too motivated. The Spurs at number 4, I think, were clearly intent on taking whoever fell, Castle or Reed Sheppard. The Detroit Pistons at number 5, I think were fine sitting and picking or either trading back. And the Hornets at number 6, obviously we're in that same boat. So, I think Reed Sheppard, one of the best shooters in this draft, shot 52.1% from 3-point range last season, 100th percentile as a catch and shoot weapon at Kentucky. Like, that skill set is going to translate. And, I think there's going to be a really high floor for Reed Sheppard in the NBA. Defensively, we'll see. He's a little bit undersized. He was very productive at the college level in the SEC. He led the SEC in steals last season. Again, a true freshman playing in the SEC. Very high IQ, someone who I think could be a legitimate playmaker, who can play both on and off the ball because of his skill set as a shooter. So, yeah, there's a lot to like with Reed Sheppard. And actually, there was a report leading into the draft on Wednesday that the Atlanta Hawks at number 1 were considering Zachary Risacher and Reed Sheppard as the potential number 1 pick. Now, how much of that is smoke? How much is that kind of dangling to see if anyone wants to trade up and get their guy? I don't know, but I think it kind of speaks to the value that NBA teams placed on Reed Sheppard. There's a lot of confidence in what he's going to be as an NBA player.
I like the way that you're selling him here. And Bill, I think that the Rockets, look, KD is KD, but I think that they're really well positioned right now. I want to see what this group is when they're healthy, because they were a really pleasant surprise last year. And they have so many pieces that seem to fit really well here. I mean, you bring in Reed Sheppard and he does a lot of things well that, say, an Amen Thompson doesn't do well, right? And so he could be a compliment if they're playing alongside each other. I really like, as Bill knows, I'm constantly singing the praises of Alper and Şengün. Jalen Green got Yeah, I like him.
Your Team Rockets.
Jalen Green got Team
Ime
Rockets.
Udoka is great with young players. I mean, this is a guy who knows how to build a culture and knows how to work with young guys, which is part of the reason Houston felt like they won the lottery when they were able to bring him in. So I'm always a little, because we're going to talk about all these guys, and many of these players are not going to work out. Like, let's be frank, most of the guys we're talking about are not going to be successful in the NBA, and I'm rooting for everybody. And so a lot of times I think it is situation, for me at least. I'm not the expert that Kyle is on watching these guys, so for me, I'll fall to situation and where you go. And if it's in a vacuum, I want the Houston Rockets are a team I would like to be drafted by if I am a guy that's going to be drafted high in the lottery. I think it's a good fit for anybody. And it's a good spot because they're well run, and it matters for a career.
I want to say it. I just want to say it, and then they can trade for KD after I say it. All right, so we're through the first 3 picks here, but there's some other picks and some other teams that we want to run through. You mentioned, Kyle, the San Antonio Spurs. They had 2 picks. They only made one of them. So opinions on that strategy vary. I want to see where you two guys fall, and then we'll also get into a couple of the bigs that were drafted in the lottery as well. We're just getting started. You're watching Beyond the Arc, and this is CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John, Kyle, and Bill hanging out after the first round of the NBA draft. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network. You can also find us in podcast form wherever you get your favorite shows. Please download, subscribe, and leave us a review. That helps people find us. That would be very helpful. All right, so we're going to start with the San Antonio Spurs, Kyle. They had 2 picks. They decided to use one of them. Let's start with the one that they actually selected a player with Stephon Castle. Tell us what kind of player they got in him. I know that there was some mixed reviews on his shooting, but it sounds like they're optimistic that he can develop his shot.
Yeah, I think every team is optimistic that they can develop their shot. I felt like going through the first round last night, it's like, oh, he's a great athlete. He moves well on defense. If the shot falls, he can be a star. I think there's a lot of players who kind of fit that category. Stephon Castle, absolutely. I think if you're ranking them in this class, would be number 1 among all prospects. He's great on defense. He was a defensive hound for UConn this past season, a team that won 37 games and won the national championship. He's good creating on the ball, has some playmaking ability. At 6'6", I really like his size, his switchability. He's a tough defender, someone who really takes on a challenge. And, I think the Spurs, Brian, right after the draft last night, talked a little bit about his mindset and kind of his headspace as a freshman at UConn that really spoke to why the Spurs liked him, which was he was a 5-star recruit. He was a McDonald's All-American. He could have gone anywhere and probably been a number 1 option for any team, but decided at UConn, a team that had Tristan Newton, a team that had Donovan Clingan, a team that had a bunch of alphas, he decided to be a role player, and he played his role beautifully. He decided to take kind of a back seat on a team that was really, really loaded and very experienced. And he reaped the benefits. UConn won the national championship. And I think he won over some people because he was selfless in how he carried himself throughout the season. So, I think he's going to be a connective type tissue for the Spurs defensively. I think he's plug and play. I like some upside in terms of his playmaking ability. And yeah, I believe in the shooting. Now, if the shooting does come around, then I think we're talking about potentially the number 1 prospect in this class. I had him ranked number 2 on my big board. So I think the Spurs ended up getting a nice little value here at number 4.
It's funny that you mentioned the shooting and how every team thinks that they can develop a shot. I remember when the Sixers took Michael Carter-Williams and we asked Sam Hinkie, then the general manager at the time, hey, what about his shot? And he was like, oh, he's going to spend a lot of time in the gym. That didn't work out so good. Bill, so they take Stephon Castle, they pair him with Wemby. It looks like it's going to be a good fit defensively. But this is a team, as you know, as everybody knows, after Devin Vassell and Wemby, they need a lot of stuff, with apologies to Trey Jones and Jeremy Sohan and Keldon Johnson. They need a lot of stuff. They had another pick at 8. They end up trading it to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I love that for the Timberwolves. They pick Rob Dillingham, and Kyle can speak to that in a second. I think it works really well for the Timberwolves, who don't have a lot of levers to pull because they're capped out. They trade a 2031 unprotected first and a 2030 swap, and they slot in a guy who looks like he's a good scorer, and Lord knows the Wolves need scoring. But what do you make of the strategy from the Spurs side to go, meh, we're good on this for now?
I don't make anything of it. I've been trying to figure out. So when they took Castle, I thought, okay, like defensive player with Wemby, they're building a great defense, glue guy, championship player, like the kind of person that Greg Popovich wants. They'll get a shooter at 8. They'll get a shooter, and that you need some shooting, as you both noted. I I don't understand it. And those, I was trying to figure out, do they think they have such a window with Wemby that they're building for the super long term and they're trying to have some balance in who they can bring
Yep.
in? Because it is true, you're not going to recruit, you're just not going to recruit real talent to San Antonio. You're going to have to draft that talent. That we saw that in their dynastic runs, and that's going to be a reality going forward. But the picks that they got, presumably, you would think are going to be at the time when Anthony Edwards is in his prime, playing really well for Minnesota. And so I wouldn't, I mean, you don't know, but those picks don't feel like they are necessarily going to have a ton of value. So that's a lot to say this, John. I don't understand what their Spurs are doing. I suppose it just does reinforce it as much as you and I, a lot of us think San Antonio can be really good really quickly. They are operating on a much more medium or long-term plan than maybe some of us expected, given how enamored we are with Wemby and his talents.
Yeah, to me, John, I think it's all about flexibility. We've seen the Oklahoma City Thunder and Sam Presti try and maximize the window that they currently have with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, with Chet Holmgren. They have, dozens and dozens of picks over the next few years. They're going to be paying Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They're going to be paying Jalen Williams. Eventually, they're going to be paying Chet Holmgren. And I think if the Spurs hit on their guys, obviously, they hit on Victor Wembanyama. They're going to end up having to pay some of these players, Stephon Castle, in a few years, assuming that he hits. I think, in 2030, 2031, when the bills come due, that first round pick could end up being flexibility, which is more valuable than maybe people expect. I think if I was picking at number 8, if I was the Spurs, it would have been really hard to turn down Rob Dillingham, because you get the best defensive guard at number 4 in Stephon Castle, and then Rob Dillingham, who has legit star potential because of his offensive production. It'd be hard to turn down that pairing, but I do think this is a long-term decision that they're making, thinking in the future when Victor Wembanyama is in his prime, playing his best NBA basketball. We could use this first-round pick to flip. We could use it for a cheap rookie contract. There's a number of different ways they could go. And by the way, number 8 in this NBA draft specifically is like number 16 in a normal draft. So, maybe in 2030, 2031, that pick could be a top 10 pick. And that's way, way, way more valuable than picking at number 8 in a really, really shallow class.
If I can just jump in real quick, John, sorry it's really sound logic. It's really smart. You just have to be right through the Spurs because, again, I don't think you have the same margin for error. So if Castle doesn't work out, and presumably Wemby's going to be pretty good going forward, this is not going to be a team, even if they're not particularly well put together, that's going to win 20 games over the course of the coming years. So you're right. I just, for our sake, because I want to see Wemby go as deep as possible, as often as possible in the playoffs, I hope they hit on Castle, because I personally, and talking to a few folks around the NBA, I'd rather have 2 bites at the apple, even in a bad draft, so that one of those guys work out. So you have to pay one of those guys. And if you got to pay 2 of those guys, great. What a problem for San Antonio to have. But again, well-run organization, maybe they're convinced in Castle they know exactly what they're doing.
2 bites at the apple makes sense to me. Obviously, they decided to go a different route here, but I do really like it for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think part of it also, Bill, is for the Spurs. There's a little bit of a bet here on the Timberwolves not working out and being so expensive that maybe they have to unplug a piece like Cat, and maybe they crumble, and now all of a sudden those picks become more valuable down the road, because 2031, I mean, who's going to be around 2031? That's like a zillion years from now. I think I did the math on that, but I don't know. I would have taken the pick. I think I'm with Bill that they could use more players. We're gonna take another break though, and then on the other side we have a whole lot of other teams that we got to get into, and there's 2 big men that were of interest to us going into the draft, in Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey, who were taken in close proximity to each other without anybody having to move up. So we have to talk about that as well. You are watching Beyond the Arc, and this is CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to a Thursday NBA draft edition of Beyond the Arc. You're watching us on CBS Sports Network. Hey, check us out over on YouTube as well. You can find our YouTube page at Beyond the Arc CBS. Hit the like button, leave us a comment, do all that stuff for us. All right, so other teams that we got to discuss here, Kyle and Bill. We're going to go to the Miami Heat, who picked at number 15. And Kyle, I want to get your opinion on Khalil Ware, who the Miami Heat, and Bill and I will discuss this afterwards, but the Miami Heat ended up signing Bam Adebayo to a 3-year deal worth $166 million. And Bill will fill us in on angry Jimmy Butler, who doesn't want to sign his extension. They don't have a lot of things that they can do this offseason. They need this pick to hit in the same way that they hit on Jaime Jaquez Jr. last year.
Yeah, and it's an interesting pick, right? Because at number 15, Dalton Knecht was on the board. Jared McCain was on the board. Isaiah Collier was on the board. They take Khalil Ware, who's a 7-foot center. He can shoot it both the inside and out. Former 5-star recruit. He actually started his career at Oregon, transferred to Indiana, and had a really good year for Indiana this past year. I think he's going to be a good NBA player. I think we'll just get that off the top. But I think the fit is interesting, if not and totally unusual for the Miami Heat with Bam Adebayo already there. I feel like their front court is mostly set. Where is someone who I think is a little bit duplicative in terms of what Adebayo brings to the table. So it's an interesting fit, certainly. I think and obviously Miami Heat have done very well in the draft the last few years, including Jaquez last year. But yeah, I thought there were some other prospects on the board who could have gone a different direction with, and Ware at number 15, taking him at 25. Sure, 15, that's a little bit too high for me.
Bill, I would have gone backcourt here, but obviously, the Heat have an idea of like Heat culture and who fits for them and whatever. And as I mentioned, they re-sign or extend Bam Adebayo. But in the process of this, around the same time, Jimmy Butler announced that he's not assigning an extension with anybody, and it looks like he's headed for free agency next offseason. It sounds like there's a little trouble in paradise down in Miami.
It does, and I was thinking about this. We almost should have seen this coming, because remember when Butler, with a couple drinks in him, got on social media and said if he'd been healthy, the Heat would have dominated. And remember Riles' reaction to that? I mean, Pat Riley was always a fairly frustrating or easily frustratable guy if you did not follow sort of the Heat way. But he let it slip in his end of the season press conference how much he found that unacceptable, and he challenged Jimmy, which is something I know in the Heat organization. They love Butler, or at least they did, but he was difficult to manage, and they were pretty proud of the fact that they felt like in bringing him there that he fit in, kind of found the place where he could have his basketball opus. And that was, I think, the first cracks that we saw, guys, in this relationship. And you're right, John. It's a pretty big statement. I'm not signing an extension, and I'm going to be a high-paid free agent. I'm a mercenary for the next year, because the thing about the Heat is they want you committed to the Heat. Maybe cult is an unfair word, but that is how people who have left Miami where it hasn't gone well have referred to that organization. And so when you leave, they don't particularly like you. They still hate LeBron James down there for reasons that I find kind of ironic, given how much they didn't like me when I covered LeBron and now like me for how I covered LeBron 12 years ago, even though I actually get along with LeBron. They hold grudges. This is a guy who's announcing, not that he's leaving necessarily, but he's doing it the way that he's doing it. Maybe he'll be somewhere else. I cannot wait to see how this goes over with Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley.
I love this. I think it's also kind of funny that he's saying I'm not signing an extension with a team that doesn't want to offer me an extension. So sure. Okay. We figure that out moving forward. Kyle, you had mentioned that you thought Dalton Knecht would have been a better fit for Miami there. He ends up falling to number 17, where the Lakers scoop him up. Tell us a little bit about him. Here's what I know. He can shoot, and I believe he's as old as LeBron.
That's correct. Yes, he will be drawing Social Security in roughly 3 to 5 years, but he's a good basketball player at this very moment in time, and I think that's valuable. He spent 5 years in the college ranks, actually began his career in JUCO, works up, plays at Northern Colorado, where he was the Northern Colorado's player of the year in that conference, transfers to Tennessee as kind of an unknown. Like, he was very productive at the mid-major level. Definitely some questions about how his game would project to the high major level, and it projected beautifully. He was the SEC player of the year. He was one of the best offensive players in college basketball last season. His athleticism was on full display. He's a really good kind of athletic jumper who can finish above the rim. Shot nearly 40% from 3-point range last season, nearly 22 points per game. He really remade that Tennessee team that under Rick Barnes has been mostly a defensive-minded team into a legitimate offensive team. And, I think that the tools are there for him to be one of the most NBA-ready players in this draft. I think because he is a little bit older, he turned 23 in April. Maybe he scared some teams off just because teams do like younger players. They like to be able to think they can mold players into who they are. But Dalton Knecht, kind of a finished product. So getting him at number 17 for the Lakers, I thought was an excellent value. One of the best picks in first round.
Yeah, and the Lakers are thrilled with it. We sort of have to reverse engineer this to figure out what's going on, right? Because later tonight, we presume, and I certainly believe, I think we all think that Bronny James will be taken by the Lakers at 55. And that means the Lakers are convinced, and they're very hopeful. That means LeBron James will stick around, and he's probably going to opt out of his deal and then sign an extension with the Lakers. And if that happens, as Kyle said, you have LeBron, you have AD, you win now, and you bring in a guy who's a shooter. You need that, who can get on the floor quickly. I'll just put this out there, and I don't have any information. It just occurred to me. There were, until yesterday, 3 picks that the Lakers, 3 first-round picks the Lakers could trade if they wanted to go big game hunting, which I know is something LeBron still very much wants. They have to make that selection before they know whether or not LeBron James is actually going to stick around. You're not going to go trade for Trae Young, let's say, or DeJounte Murray or Donovan Mitchell unless LeBron is signed on the dotted line. So, yes, I like the pick. It's also a guy that you could move if, in fact, you decide to move him and some of those picks to go get somebody. And so that one of 2 things happen. You take the best value. You just this is a person who will have the most value to the teams we're going to deal with. And or you call up one of your respective GMs and say, hey, on the off chance that we are actually going to make a move for one of these guys, who do you sort of like? And so I just think it's a really good pick. It's just hard to know if it's a good pick because they really see him in the purple and gold this year, or they're going to go try to get somebody else, and he's one of those pieces.
Yeah, there's so much up in the air for the Lakers still. LeBron free agency technically begins on Sunday. We're going to have our free agent preview tomorrow on the show right here on CBS Sports Network, but he has until the 29th to decide whether or not he's going to pick up his option for $51.4 million. D'Angelo Russell also has an option. They're hoping he opts in for the same reasons that Bill just mentioned. So they have more, yes, they could use him. They need somebody to take some shots. Along with the Denver Nuggets last year, they were bottom of the league in 3-point attempts. So Dalton Knecht comes in, and he's a guy that could help him now, or they could reroute him depending on what happens with LeBron. So a lot up in the air for them. Another team I want to hit from the first round real quick here, Bill, the Knicks. They had 2 picks. They ended up moving one of them to Oklahoma City for 5 second-rounders. Sure. They ended up taking a kid. I hope I'm getting this right, Kyle. Pacome Dadier. And we don't have to belabor this too much because he's never going to see the floor for the New York Knicks because, Bill, very busy last couple of days for the New York Knicks, who got much better. We can discuss the price they paid for Mikal Bridges being an outrageous overpay of 5 first-rounders, but they're better now. And they ended up re-signing OG Anunoby to a 5-year deal worth $212.5 million. What do you make of we haven't talked about this. What do you make of the last couple of days for the Knicks?
I like all that. It's an arms race, right? They saw what the Celtics did, and they thought, okay, we've got to keep up. And I think there's a few things. I actually don't mind the second-round picks because with the amount of money the Knicks are going to be spending in the years ahead and the lack of flexibility that could create, those are ways you could just maybe take a bunch of shots and just try to get guys over what they hope is a pretty long timeline. And I love it. I love it for New York City. You're right. It's too much for Bridges, but it reminds me of quarterback markets, right? Where Kirk Cousins gets paid an exorbitant amount of money at $87 million many years ago. And then it just starts the moment that Gobert, not just Gobert for the 4 first-round picks, but that it kind of worked. Do we think it? I mean, Minnesota certainly thinks it worked. You pay the price you have to pay if you think the piece fits. So I love it for the Knicks. Not sure I love it for me and you, because as much as I love Ash, it's going to be a lot of Ash just being real. I mean, it's going to be Knicks fans central. I mean,
she did a video.
She won. She won the draft.
She did a video yesterday, and we played it on the program while you were out, and it was just Ashley being really excited, and then dumping on the Sixers, and I'm like, I do that. I dump on the Sixers. You can be excited about the Knicks. Kyle, I'm not even going to come to you on Pacome Dadier because the poor kid. The Knicks are too deep now. They play 5, 6 guys at most. Now they have 8 guys. The Tibbs is going to have to figure out how to get into the rotation. This kid's never going to see the floor. I feel bad for him. I hope he enjoys New York City. Great city for him, though. On the other side, we're going to take another quick break, and then Kyle will give us his winner, his loser from the draft, the best value from the first round, and also the biggest reach. That's coming up right here on Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network. All right, welcome back to an NBA draft edition of Beyond the Arc. We're going to go rapid fire through some fun topics here, Kyle. Give us your winner of the first round.
Never thought I'd say this, but I think the Washington Wizards were a winner on draft night.
Wow.
Pretty impressed with what they did on Wednesday.
Never happened before.
I know this is a first. I just want to congratulate the Wizards. They ended up getting Alex Sarr at number 2, someone who I think a lot of people believe is the number 1 prospect in this class. Bub Carrington at number 14 traded for that pick on draft day with the Portland Trailblazers, addressed their front court and their back court. And then at number 24, Kaishan George ends up falling. This is a guy who I had as a lottery pick, 6'8", can shoot above 40% from 3-point range. All 3 of these guys, very, very young, I think could be kind of a foundational floor for this Wizards franchise that has been downtrodden for so long. So hats off to the Washington Wizards.
No, I love the class. So, John, you remember this? You laughed at me. I said that the Wizards were actually building something that they thought they had the time. And I'm just going to say this, drafting off Kyle. Michael Winger has put together who runs basketball operations, an incredibly impressive group of people around him. He's got former GMs who are scouting or deputies. It's a ton of experience in that Wizards organization. And yes, there's an ownership question, but I think the actual basketball operation structure has been really impressive what they put together there. And I love that Kyle loves it because I know there's some optimism in that organization that they can do some things over the next 2 years.
That's good to hear. I have 2 Wizards friends, and they were pretty despondent last night. I wonder if that was just like muscle memory that they're not used to getting nice things. I will say, Bud Carrington, his first name's Carlton, right? Carlton Carrington. Yes. Yeah, just like me with Philly. Carlton Carrington, great name. That's a winner just for that. All right, give us a loser.
Yeah, loser, we're going to go with the Pistons. And I hate to beat a dead horse, kick someone when they're down, but this is a team that had the worst record in the NBA last season. They were bottom 5 in 3-point shooting percentage. They could have had the number 1 pick last year, end up falling to number 5. Could have had the number 1 pick this year, end up falling to number 5. And at number 5, they select Ron Holland, someone who is a massive swing. He was a former number 1 recruit, but he's long, he's athletic, highlight reel player. Doesn't really shoot the 3. There's going to be a lot of bricks laid in Detroit next season with this team. And I thought the Detroit coming into this draft with Cade Cunningham, with Jaden Ivey, would try and surround those 2 players with more shooting. Ron Holland doesn't really check that box. So I'm curious to see kind of which direction this franchise is going. I think it's an interesting swing, and it maybe end up working out. But, I think just from a fit perspective, I think it was a curious fit at best for Pistons at number 5.
Yeah, just going with a approach that means no shooting, bold approach, Cotton. Let's see if it's going to work. That's my that's my comment. Good luck, Detroit.
Bold approach, Cotton. Also, they could use a coach, but other than that, Detroit has everything figured out. All right, give us best value from the first round.
Best value was Don McClingan at number 7. He had the second best odds to go number 1 on draft night, ended up falling to number 7. And I was a little bit surprised by this. I'm going to be honest. I thought there was going to be some teams that would be seeing Don McClingan fall and make the move up to select him. He ends up falling to the Portland Trailblazers at number 7. We thought number 1 and number 2 would be Risacher and Sarr in some order. 3 was likely Reed Sheppard. Spurs were looking at guard at number 4 in Detroit. We didn't know exactly which direction maybe they would go back, but number 7 for the Trailblazers, getting Donovan McClingan, I think one of the best defensive big men in this draft class. Excellent value. And, I think to get a guy who they probably would have ranked on their own personal board as a top 5 prospect at number 7 in this draft class in particular, I thought was great value for the Portland Trailblazers.
And Portland needed some value, and they needed a good pick because the trade it's early, but the trade post Lillard things have not gone well and it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. I'll just say this, good news too. When it snows or there's ice or there's just the threat of fog or maybe there might be rain someday, DeAndre Ayton doesn't have to go to work anymore. So this is like a great, it's just DeAndre, you can stay home, you do your thing, play whatever you do. I don't know, video games, look at the Weather Channel. We got a guy now.
Donovan Clingan can go to work in the snow. DeAndre Ayton might be going to work somewhere else after this trade. It could also signal that they've decided that, hey, we'd rather move on with Clingan and not DeAndre Ayton. And then also Robert Williams is still there, and he's always injured as well. I do think that this makes sense for Portland because in addition to picking up Clingan, they also traded, as I mentioned, for Deni Avdija. And in addition, in that trade, they ended up sending out 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks, which a lot of people think sounds a little bit like an overpay for Avdija, but it gets them under the tax bill on a team that they don't want. That team cannot be in the tax. That team has to be like young and bad and in the draft next year and moving forward. All right, give us, that was best value. let's go the opposite side, Kyle. Who was the biggest reach?
Yeah, biggest reach on draft night, the first round, I think, was Zach Edey at number 9. And I think it's related to Donovan Clingan going at number 7. I think the Memphis Grizzlies really, really wanted Donovan Clingan. It wouldn't be surprising if in the next few days we learn that the Grizzlies tried to trade up to get Donovan Clingan and then maybe hit the panic button a little bit. Like, we need size. We need someone who can produce right now. Donovan Clingan off the board. Who else have we got? Zach Edey. He's 7'4". You literally can't miss him. We'll just sit here and take the pick. I think there was a pretty big gap probably for a lot of teams going from Donovan Clingan to Zach Edey and then going from Zach Edey to Yves Missi or Deron Holmes, one of the other bigs in this draft class. I feel like at number 9 is a little bit rich for Zach Edey, but I think it's an interesting fit. I think in Memphis, obviously he's so big, he's been so dominant as a producer, won back-to-back National Player of the Year awards at Purdue, inside and out. I think he's going to be an interesting fit with the Grizzlies. I would have taken him in the late lottery, maybe in the late teens. Number 9 feels just a little bit high for me, guys.
Yeah, drafting for need meets a reach in this part of the first round usually ends in disaster. I'll say this in defense of Memphis, and it's easy to forget because of what happened last year with the injuries. They're a contender in a really crowded Western Conference, and they need, as Kyle said, someone that comes in and plays immediately. So he fits a role, he fits a need. He's not 19 years old, so presumably he can get in there and get some minutes. He's a physical dude, he's a big dude, so it's not like he didn't develop certain things if he's just a role player. I understand why they did it. And the proof is going to be not just in how he develops, but how good Memphis is. Because if they're on the brink, and this is a small but important piece, I understand it. Well, it'll be curious to see whether it works out, both in terms of the team and in terms of his development as a player.
Yeah, they needed a big. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like offensively, because especially when you bring back Ja and Desmond Bane and they're all healthy and Triple J, they like to run. So it'll be interesting offensively. Defensively, there's going to be a little in the rim between him and Triple J. Good luck getting to the rim against those two guys, but it's going to be fun to watch for sure. All right, one more break, and then we have to discuss the reason why we're all excited about the second round, and it's a 2-day event this year. It's Bronny James Day. We're going to discuss that next right here on Beyond the Arc on CBS Sports Network.
I'm Jeremy St. Louis. Here's what's coming up on HQ Spotlight at the top of the hour. We're going to talk about that first round of the NBA draft. Michael Donnell and Tim Doyle are here to help us with that. We're also going to preview the U.S. men's national team taking on Panama tonight, their second game at the Copa America. And division frontrunners versus the rest of the division. Matt Snyder's going to join us for a little bit of a debate topic there. It's all coming up. HQ Spotlight, top of the hour. Now back to Beyond the Arc with Kyle Boone, John Gonzalez, and William H. Ryder.
Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome back to Beyond the Arc with William H. Ryder. That's amazing. I didn't know it was an H. William, while we have you, let's discuss another big name for today, Bronny James. He did not get taken in the first round. Everybody anticipates that he will go to the Lakers at number 55. Heavy favorites there, minus 390 to end up with the son of LeBron James. We were just penciling it in. Is he coming to LA?
I'd love to tell you somebody's bold enough to make some kind of crazy move. I'd love to tell you that Pat Riley's frustration toward LeBron James would motivate him to make a revenge pick, but I think he's going to be. Every indication from every person I've talked to believes that it's going to be at 55, the Lakers taking Bronny James. And it's interesting. I was going through some of the teams that could make the selections, and part of what you have to look for is who does Clutch Sports represent? Oh, there's a Clutch guy on that team. You don't want to alienate Rich Paul. There's a Clutch guy on that team. And so even if I wanted to concoct a scenario that I could throw to you guys, I wouldn't believe it. It's going to be the Lakers. He only worked out with 2 teams. The other is the Suns. Worked out a couple times. I think it'll be LA, and I'll hope for a surprise because chaos is fun.
Kyle, I want to get your opinion on Bronny and what he projects to be in the NBA and all that good stuff. But first I want to run this past you guys because, and this is not an original thought. This is something that a lot of people have mentioned, but there's another scenario here that would be way funnier and way more fun for those of us in the content business. And instead of him going at 55 to the Lakers, the Celtics have a chance at 54, one pick ahead, to do the funniest thing possible, which is draft Bronny James. And then you could have like a little hostage video situation. You know, we'll release him if you send some stuff to us. Please, Boston, look, Bill knows I can't stand anything Boston related. This would make me like Boston. Let's do that. Tell us about Bronny, Kyle.
Yeah, this is a guy who was like a borderline 5-star recruit a year ago, coming to USC on a top 3 recruiting class with the Trojans. And he had a sudden cardiac arrest event last summer. He missed the start of the regular season as a true freshman for USC. And so, you know, I think if you look at Bronny James in totality and you can kind of separate Bronny James, the older son of LeBron James, from Bronny James, USC freshman, who was a former borderline 5-star recruit, I think there's a legitimate case that Bronny James should be a 2nd-round pick in this draft. And I know people cannot hold 2 thoughts in their mind at the same time, but you know, he really is a guy who I think I would be willing to bet on in the 2nd round. I wouldn't fault the Celtics if they took him at number 54. I believe that he is an interesting long-term prospect. He's got really good defensive tools. He's really smart, can defend multiple positions, can put the ball on the floor and create a little bit. Reminds me a little bit, guys, of like a Deuce McBride or a DeAnthony Melton, someone who's very versatile on defense, can be maybe like a microwave scorer off the bench. So I think if you look at kind of the last few years as a prospect, as he's grown, I actually believe in Bronny James, and maybe I'm one of the few who believe in him, but I think he's an interesting prospect who could end up playing real minutes in the NBA in the future.
Bill, are you buying it? I mean, I know that you've talked to people around the league who we've discussed it on the show before, that if his last name, and Chris said this the other day when he was on, Chris Walker, if his last name was anything other than James, it's unlikely he'd even be in this draft. Probably goes back to school. What, like, is the sentiment starting to change around the league? Because we mentioned it. I watched that camp video of him just shooting, the combine video of him just shooting threes in an empty gym. Looked good to me.
Yeah, look, he's an impressive young man. I mean, he is an impressive dude, whatever the last name on the back of his jersey. But no, most people I talk to, it's interesting, right? Because most people I talk to think he's 100% an NBA player, absolutely draftable 2 years from now. But the reality is that he's coming into the NBA. And so that does become part of what you have to factor. As Kyle said, I've never been able to hold 2 thoughts in my head at the same time. I'm going to try to do both. He shouldn't be drafted in this draft, and he only is going to be because of who his dad is. But if his name were, Bronny Gonzalez, and he came out when he shouldn't have, maybe there'd be somebody who'd reach in the second, great name, Bronny H. Gonzalez, who would reach because they know that he's out too soon, but there's this potential. He should have been in college for 2 years. Let me end here. I know we got to roll. I think the Lakers are the wrong place for him. If you're going to draft him, it's got to be a team that shows a real ability to use their G League and to use their coaching staff to develop players. This is a 2-year timeline. I hope it works out for the young man because he's an impressive kid.
I hope it's going to work out for him too, because he does comport himself really well. Those interviews have been fantastic. He's got so much pressure on him from being LeBron's kid that like, it would be nice if something worked out for him that he could have for himself and not just be in this like pressure cooker of a life that he has by no choice of his own, just because of his DNA. Kyle, this has been super fun to have you on the program, and we got to do it again for sure. But
Good
you
work,
have a 2nd round mock,
it.
right? That you got out there. You want to plug some stuff?
Yeah, I guess you could follow me on Twitter at Kyle Boone. We have a 2nd round mock draft on CBSSports.com. Go check that out. The draft starts at 4 p.m. Eastern today. This final day of the NBA draft. Thank goodness. I will see you guys after vacation in like 3 weeks.
Yes, well earned. And you guys will see me and Bill and Ashley tomorrow. We'll be back at it on CBS Sports Network at 2 p.m. Eastern for our free agency and off-season primer. Something tells me Ashley's going to want to talk about the Knicks, but we'll see. For now, for Bill Ryder, for Kyle Boone, I'm John Gonzalez. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.